From CRI Simple Numbers, this is Profitability Playbook, the Simple Numbers Podcast, a podcast for those who champion market growth and anchor the nation's economy, small businesses, and entrepreneurs.
Hi, welcome to the Simple Numbers Profitability Playbook Podcast. This is Maxson, and that's Brandon Gray. And you'll notice here in a second that we are missing the man himself, Greg Crabtree. He's got some prior commitments, so we apologize. You're getting the B team this episode, but I think
we're gonna make it worth it, though.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We can hold it down. All right. And as mentioned before on our last two podcasts, we have continuing the labor efficiency series. So we've talked about total labor efficiency, we've talked about direct labor efficiency, and now we're going to talk about management labor efficiency. But first, we had the pleasure to be with our Simple Numbers Mastermind group in Miami last week. And for those of you who don't know what that is, a few years ago, Brandon and I around the water cooler, where most of our ideas come from, decided we wanted to do a mastermind group. Actually, that was a long time ago, but then it took about another 3 years after that to get it rolling.
Started in 2018.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, like forever ago, right? We take about 8 to 12 companies of our client base and go to various locations around the U.S. and basically do a data sharing, content sharing, best practices sharing event, and really get a chance to dive deep into these businesses and really allow for some good things to be shared amongst the group. So, Brandon, what are some of your takeaways that you saw from last week?
Yeah. Well, I guess to put it in a little bit of context, these are some of our top performing clients. And, so they're hard charging entrepreneurs, do really well, bring a lot to the table, as leaders, bring a lot in terms of their ability to build teams, take companies to the next level. It's a good format to kind of share, okay, these are struggles that we're having. Here's opportunities that we're having, both inside their business and outside. One of the topics that we talked about was investing outside your business. Kind of once you get to the point to where, man, I've reinvested and ran out of ideas of where to get that next 50% return. Okay, well, let's diversify some wealth. So some good conversations along those lines as well. So, kind of cream of the crop, you might say, in terms of the type of entrepreneurs they were, the type of businesses that they've been able to build and maintain. And so whenever they give you ideas and feedback, you listen. And the group challenges each other as well. So that'll give you a little context as to the level of folks that were there. What was kind of interesting is we had conversations around their data. Of course, we put their data, it's in their Simple Numbers clients, so it's part of the Simple Numbers model and what have you. Look at their data as a group, look at their data individually, and also kind of compare it to the 100 company model. Very similar to what we're seeing in the 100 company model. Financial performance from 22 to 23 was about even though they did a pretty decent job of being able to move both gross margin and revenue up. Profit was about the same year over year, which is similar to what we saw in the 100 company model from that standpoint. A couple takeaways, though, and one that we're going to talk about here today is management LER. The group as a whole is doing a better job of getting more leverage out of their management and administrative teams than the 100 company model is. And so whenever you kind of look at that, to some degree, it is the maturity of their businesses. Most of them have been in business a long time. They've built out great management teams and what have you, but also the level of accountability that they have. They really look at, okay, I'm investing in this team. What is that team delivering? So they're holding them to a very high standard, which is something we're going to talk about here in a second when we talk about the different levels your business may be at and what that means relative to your management LER. Also, we had great conversations around marketing. That's a topic that we've been talking about on the podcast from time to time. One of the best insights, and we see this in data, but it was great to hear a client mention it in terms of success that they've had with marketing spend. And the thing that they said is when something stops working, it's time to cut bait. It's time to move on to something else. Now, that didn't mean that they quit spending. They changed what they were spending dollars on. And so when I use an easy example is, let's say, digital. If a digital channel stopped working, they'd find another. So that constant experimentation, pushing the envelope a little bit on what's working, what's not working, and being very nimble. Another member of our group has a IT security business. They spoke quite a bit, gave some great presentation data around just what the framework looks like in the environment when it comes to IT security. And the thing that struck me is, I guess I'd had this notion that these cyber criminals are, two guys in their mom's basement trying to, send out emails and what have you, to where it's really truly organized crime. You're dealing with companies that have strategic plans. They have initiatives, they have training, they have departments, they have management resources, they have profit and loss
Quotas.
statements. Yeah,
Quotas.
I mean, it is from a business standpoint, they run it just like any other business. Although what they do is obviously illegal, and so you're not dealing with some guy that's excuse me, in his basement trying to get you to pay a few $100. They actually have expert negotiators on their staff. So when you get hit with a ransomware attack, you're dealing with someone who for 8 to 10 hours a day, that's all they do. So I thought that was pretty interesting as well, from that standpoint. Another thing that we kind of took away from the group, everybody is definitely in this street fight of an economy that we've talked about in the past. No matter who you're dealing with, whether it's B2B, whether it's B2C, no matter the size of your business, you've got to do things differently now than you were doing 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. We talked about competitive advantages and how that's changing in business, and how you've got to deliver more value to the marketplace, and you got to look at the ways that you're delivering that value. So that was a great takeaway. We did some exercises on that. Personal development was another one that we spent some time on as well. Takeaway from that, one of the things is that this isn't rocket science, but life has seasons. I don't know what season you're in right now. It could be a great season. It could be a dreary winter season, personally, but it's going to change. And to really kind of use the support system you have around you. If you don't have a mentor, if you don't have an inner circle that you're working with on a personal level, if you don't have people in your life that are challenging you from that standpoint, you're missing some things. And it's real easy to let those slip whenever you're running a business that's growing. So that was a takeaway as well. On the investment side, or the investing side of the house, a lot of the limited partnership deals that people invest in, they're moving really slow. They just don't pencil out like they once were. But they're still out there. You've got to be selective. You might have to kiss 100 toads before you find that investment that's going to be a good one. So once again, just kind of an important thing to keep in mind when it comes to, don't run at the first thing you see out there. There's many others. Make sure it's going to be a good fit. And obviously the network, once you start investing and working in those circles, you meet more people who do the same, who have access to additional deals and resources and other networks. And, it's a pretty tight knit community in that regard. And you start investing in a few deals, they're going to introduce you to more. The last thing that I'll mention on that, then we'll move on to labor efficiency, is that you got to do your homework. When it comes to investing, no one's going to lay it on a silver platter for you, and it's going to be a great investment. Even the way they present the data and look at it, you got to do your own homework. You got to dig into it. Is that a valid business model? Are the people who are behind it, do they have skin in the game of substance? Looking at the concept, the idea, whether it's a business or it's a investment property, or for example, it could be something along the lines of an office complex, or a partnership that's building an apartment building, or it could be self-storage. Where are they getting their data? What validity does that data have? Those kind of things. And so do your homework on the deals, obviously. So it was just a handful of things. I mean, it was a great time. We were down in South Beach, a great location. So really, I think the group got a lot of value and some really good takeaways from working and spending some time with each other.
Yeah, we all made it back. So that was good. Well, awesome. Let's talk about management labor efficiency. So just to set the stage out there for everyone listening, in our simple numbers model, the business engine, revenue minus your non-labor cost of goods sold gives you your gross margin. Your gross margin less your direct labor spend gets you your contribution margin. The contribution margin number is that cleanest number on the P&L. It's now what you have left to run your business after you've executed, right? And our management labor lives down what we call the chassis, where we have our operating expenses, and we hold that management labor accountable to that contribution margin number. Because as a manager, you are responsible for everything above that line. If you're the owner of the company, or if you're an administrative person, you want to see, how can I best affect revenue, control costs, manage labor to get that output number. So the contribution margin divided by that management labor number gives you your management labor efficiency ratio. And these numbers are going to have some different seasons in the business. For example, sub 2 million in revenue, you're probably going to be pretty high on that number. It could be $5-6 of contribution margin you're getting for a management position, simply because it might be one or two of you. But as you grow and surpass that 2 million, from about 2 to 5 million, you're sort of going to see that number come down and live somewhere between the $3.50 range to $4.50 range. That's where you see that number live, because you're beginning to add management labor to your team. And then once you surpass that 5 million in revenue, you should start to see that number coming up, as you are going to reach a point where you're just not adding management labor. I said to Brandon before this, it's like, yeah, how many COOs are you going to add to your team, right? You might add one, and then you might have a controller, but then you might add a lower level accounting person after that to maybe handle an AP or AR type thing. But those are some of the things that are going to happen to make that number push up once you cross the 5 million threshold. So with that being said, Brandon, take us away.
Yeah, well, if you think about the concept, the number one job of your admin and management labor, and by the way, we group those together and we just call it management labor. So as we move forward, if we're speaking management, it would include your administrative staff as well. Their number one job is to help make direct labor as efficient as possible. So you start to look at, well, how do you do that? It could be through sales strategy. We're going to find a way to sell our service or product at a higher price. It could be through increasing gross margin. We're going to work with our vendors. We're going to put systems and processes in place to work more efficiently. We might get a little bit better pricing on materials and what have you. That could be another lever that's going to help direct labor be as efficient as possible. The third thing is the management of direct labor. What are you doing to coach, teach, and train your team so that they can perform their job at a different level than they were yesterday? And so training programs, I've long since said that the one or greatest untapped competitive advantage in the marketplace is the ability to rapidly train and develop your direct labor team. How quickly can you get them up to speed? Can you do that faster than your competitors? Whenever you hire a direct labor resource, do you have a system and process and a training curriculum that includes testing, which is extremely important because people pay attention whenever there's a test involved, to get them up to speed? And a lot of companies historically have kind of relied on, well, go sit by John, sit by Sally, follow them around, ride in the truck with them, whatever it may be, and you'll just learn how to do it. Well, that will work, but it is an extremely slow process, and you're at the mercy of whoever the trainer is. And so you got to have the right way, your company's way of doing things, to rapidly deploy that labor. And so that's a big component of it. So if you don't have that in place, you got to really kind of look and see, what do we got to do to better train, teach, and develop our team? And then as you kind of look at the structure of that management labor, the biggest thing we want to see there is that resource, that team member, working in their highest and best use a majority of the time? So let me give you an easy example of that. Scheduling, booking travel, those kind of things. When we first started the Simple Numbers practice, Greg and I, we would do everything soup to nuts. If you want to talk about services, give us a call. If you need to schedule a call or a meeting, give us a call. If you need a model updated, give us a call. We did it all. And what you start to find is that at the time, I was spending about a day a week doing nothing but scheduling calls. Well, in walks opportunity, right? That was not my highest and best use. It is an extremely important function of the position. It's extremely important. However, my time was better fit to either bring on a new client, talk to a new client, or work with an existing client in a consulting call. And so we bring on talent to allow us to schedule calls. It frees up 8 hours. So that's what I mean by working in your highest and best use. Many times what you find, especially whenever you're growing under 3 million in revenue, you're at that million, 2 million mark, is that people are wearing 30 different hats. And as they start to grow, they go, hey, I got to have more resources. Well, I don't disagree with that. But the first question I want to ask is, what type of resource do you need? And many times the only way you can get that answer is to, and everybody loves this, you got to track your time. And believe me, you can do it. I've done it for 20 years in 15-minute increments every day. You can track your time. And if you'll track your time for 4 to 6 weeks, you will start to realize, where am I spending my time? And then you can evaluate, is that in my highest and best use? And 9 times out of 10, what you find out is, we don't need another manager. We don't need another supervisor. We don't need another accountant. We don't need another marketing team member. You need an assistant. And especially if you're the CEO, if you're the owner slash CEO, the most leveraged position you can have on your admin management team is an assistant, and a good one. Right now, I would say bang for the buck, I got to look at possibly the Philippines. The Philippine market is delivering college educated people who get US culture, who have better English than I do, who work on your schedule at a very affordable rate. And so that can then allow you to focus on the most important things inside your business, as opposed to taking time on things that they're important and they are of value, but not your highest and best use. And so those are kind of some little levers that you can use as you look at maximizing that management LER.
Yeah, and I think one thing that is lost on some people in terms of the assistant is they just think they can add more positions that management labor bucket, not understand the actual revenue going to be needed to generate to do that. And so what you'll find sometimes is I need to hire a VP, or I need this higher level position. And like Brandon said, sometimes just an assistant. Sometimes it could be an administrative resource that from the accounting side, hey, I might need a controller. It's like, well, do you really need that one yet, or you just need someone to keep part of the books, and
Right.
maybe you outsource another piece of it?
Mhm.
And so we find ourselves oftentimes with clients coming to us really overloaded in the management labor side. And now I'll point you all to our website. I wrote a great blog post. Yes, I did. I wrote a
Shameless
great blog
plug.
post. Yeah, right. On lagging versus catalytic spends. And we do encourage some of our small business clients, as they're growing, to sort of saying, hey, wait, when is the proper time to add management labor? Because sometimes if you risk hiring it ahead of your growth, I mean, that growth better be there, because that stuff is not billing for you. So if you go hire that VP, that COO that you think you need, is the revenue going to be coming in if you hire ahead of that? And so what you oftentimes see is small businesses might say, hey, I'm going to push my number and maybe add a management team member later, versus more of a direct client serving, client facing team member first. So just keep that in mind, that it's an expensive hire. We do lots of calculations on that, understanding, hey, if I add $150,000 director of finance to my team, okay, well, what's going to be that? And oftentimes, Brandon, tell me if I'm wrong here, but around 6 times that person's cost of revenue, you probably are going to have to add to justify and keep things level.
Minimum, if you kind of think of it in terms of, if you've got pass through cost from a direct cost standpoint, it might be closer to 10 times their salary and revenue. Many times is what you got to add to cover that and leverage that position from that standpoint. So let's talk a little bit. You kind of mentioned that, Mike, a little bit about the seasons or the phases that teams go through and companies go through, and how you use that management labor efficiency metric during those times. So, as Mike mentioned, um, whenever we get a new client in particularly that starts with this, I would say greater than 50%, probably 60, 70% of the time, we look at their management LER and it's too low. And you say, well, how do you know if it's too low? Once again, we kind of look at that based upon size company, where are you at relative to that? Are you above a 3.5? Are you above a 4.5 in management LER relative to your size? And so 9 times out of 10, the story is, well, I'm going to grow into my footprint, right? I'm going to grow into it. Well, you better have some capital if you're going to make that move. Not to say it's a bad one, but in the current environment, growing gross margin is easier said than done. And so while that person is getting up to speed and working to be productive and growing into that role, you got to have some capital to kind of fund that, perhaps, or know that you're going to take a reduction in profitability along that way. Then, as you see a business start to transform a little bit, you enter this, what we've mentioned in the Simple Numbers books, this black hole, which for most businesses is between $3 and $5 million in revenue. When you're in that black hole, the reason we call it a black hole is because you have to add a substantial amount of cost, in particularly management labor cost, that aren't being fully utilized yet. So let's take a company that's 3 million and you go, okay, hey, we're running around with our hair on fire. Our management LER has gotten up really high. We're dropping the ball. We have a lack of appropriate systems and processes and accountability. It's just not, it's on a shaky foundation. It's just not being ran as it should. Okay, let's hire a director of operations manager, give them whatever title you want to call. Okay, when you first bring them in, you've brought on full salary, but you haven't brought in the margin to cover that yet from a contribution margin perspective. Because keep in mind, whenever you add margin dollars, you're probably going to have to add direct labor dollars with that. Okay. So you bring them in, your management LER starts to go down. You've got to have really clear objectives as to how I'm going to grow through that black hole and how quickly I can grow through it, because you're probably going to have an ops guy, a finance guy, a marketing or sales guy. Or from that standpoint. And so I'm going to be adding a lot of labor, which is going to cause that management LER to come down. Then I make sure they're in the highest and best use. And as I grow to closer to 5 million in revenue, I start to leverage those costs again. So kind of that journey. You're usually pretty good then until you, as Mike mentioned, until you get closer to about 10 million. And what's interesting around 10 million, this is a takeaway we had with our mastermind group from a couple of sessions ago. Many times around 10 million, you hit a glass ceiling. And you start to find that your company is growing faster than your team can grow. People even on steroids can only grow so quickly. And so you hit that 10 million mark and you start to go, okay, to get to 15 or 20 million, I've got to perhaps have a person who's been there, done that, a different level of talent, a different way of thinking, of organizing, managing, training, and so forth and so on. You likely are going to have to go to the outside marketplace to find that position. And
if you remember, Brandon, on our value builders we go over with the clients, one of the value builders for a company when looking at deals, potentially making offers to companies, is how is that second tier management team? How is that basically not dependent on the owner? So owner dependence is actually the title. And so how do you begin to build that as you scale to basically say, hey, listen, this thing can function. Just right around here, Greg is, Greg can take off and me and Brandon won't burn the place down. Yeah, right. Yeah. But that's what you want to get to, is where you have that next layer in there. So when the time comes and a company's looking to potentially purchase, and if there's an exit, they can say, hey, you know what, we can buy this guy out and he's gone, put our own person in place, or maybe there's someone to take over, but the structure remains the same. The company will run. And so I think that alludes a little bit to what Brandon's talking about.
Yeah, definitely. And the good news, so there's good news and bad news when you get to that level. The good news is that we can kind of calculate what you've got to move to from a gross margin and contribution margin perspective to allow for that spend in those hires. We can map that out. You got a roadmap, but you always make money on paper. That's the good part. The good part is once you find the right person, they are definitely rocket fuel. The bad news is it's your first time hiring a role at that level. There's a good chance you're going to miss on the first one or two. And you just got to kind of, you got to identify that as early as possible, because, let's say you're bringing on somebody at $250,000 a year, that gets really expensive. And so as soon as you realize that they are not going to work, you got to move on. You got to move to the next one, and you'll take the lessons and you'll apply that to making the next hire and get better and move on. So that's kind of good news, bad news from that standpoint.
Yeah, make sure their role is clearly defined. And I'll give you an example. So I was this person. We were probably about 1.5, 1.6 in revenue long time ago. I feel like I've been here forever. Long time ago. And I remember Greg and Brandon, I go through the interview process and listen, we have 3 partners here, Greg, Don, and Julianne, and you need to make sure they're as productive as possible to their highest and best use, because there's so much stuff. So Brandon and Greg bring me into this room, and they got an Excel sheet. I actually still have it. And it had so many things on there that I had no choice but to be productive. There was never a moment where I didn't. But that allowed, for example, take sales calls, for example. I've always done them here since around that time. And, Brandon didn't have to do them anymore. Greg didn't have to do them anymore. Right. And so Brandon could go instead of talking 4 sales calls, he can go do client work. Greg, instead of doing 4 sales calls, he could go do 4 speaking engagements. And that allowed for that, that growth there in the business. So make sure, because again, it's expensive. And so it's nice to be like, oh, I really wish I had that. Make sure that role is clearly defined, and you load them up, and they got plenty of stuff to do. Get as much as you can off their plate onto that role, because that's what it's there for.
So we talked about the fun part, which was kind of growing into that footprint, the journey and doing that, mapping it out, the different levels, your $2 million and below, it's probably you, a right-hand person, and maybe an admin. You get closer to 3, you might have added another position or 2. 3 to 5, you start to add more infrastructure. Then at 10, you got more of a true executive team at that point in time. Let's talk about where a lot of folks are today, though. So 100 company model, the biggest thing that stands out, and we see this obviously on a lot of client calls, declining management LER. So we're in an environment right now to where people are buying hope, and hope is really expensive. And here's what I mean by that. People are holding on to their admin management teams that they built 2018 through middle of 2022. Where the market's on fire, I'm growing rapidly, I need that next person. We're outgrowing all our systems and processes. We've added 30 employees. I got to have somebody to kind of keep watch on things. And then we hit a little bit of a brick wall. And so in doing that, we've seen some folks lose a few margin dollars. They've kept their admin management teams the same. And it is a huge lever inside your business. And so they're kind of hoping that the market is going to improve and they can then leverage those resources. Well, we're just not seeing a lot of data as of yet to tell us that that's going to happen anytime soon. It may get a little better, but we're going to be in this street fight for some time. And so that's why I call it buying hope. When you're in that position, you've got to make a decision about how much capital are you willing to risk continuing to have a heavy admin management team. What do your leading indicators tell you about outlook? And I would tell you that your pipeline can be very deceiving. One of the things that you really need to look into along those lines is not only what my pipeline looks like, but what is my average day to close? You might have a full pipeline, but everybody's just pushing all the deals. So I got to evaluate the environment that I'm in, evaluate the amount of capital that I'm willing to risk. If you don't have capital, you have no choices. And then I got to look at that admin management team and kind of go, okay, guys, we got to restructure this. We got to look and solve the problem a little bit differently because the market isn't just going to give us the margin. We've got to go out and create it. And so back to highest and best use, what's everyone doing? I look at how difficult is it to replace a position in the current marketplace. If it's a position that I can, I'm not undervaluing anyone, but I can go, okay, I can go find this person, fairly easily. I can get them up to speed fairly easily from that standpoint. Then I got to consider that as a potential position that I may need to make a change in from that standpoint. And so right now, I think you've really got to kind of look at where the organization is today. Where's it going to be in the current marketplace? How do I close that gap? And what are the moves I need to make to reduce that admin management labor spend? And we can identify, we can tell you all day what the amount of reduction you're going to have to make. And it's not fun, but it's a short-term step back in many cases in order to then move forward again. And I'll also tell you, 9 times out of 10, you find out folks aren't nearly as busy as they appear to be.
That's right. And keep in mind, with that being said, make sure that there is enough there because you could just outsource that position, right? Get an outsourced resource to do it. Like Brandon said, Philippines, stuff like that, where it's like, hey, I save a little money, shift the risk. Because sometimes, we'll get this real quick example. I get a lot of times people call. It's like, well, I'm thinking about using you guys, but I'm thinking about hiring a CFO. And it's like, well, you're $3 million in revenue. There isn't enough CFOing to do, but I could do it for you in an hour or 2 hours a month, and you'll get all the CFOing you need. And so just be mindful of that they do have a full slate for that role. And then you got to evaluate that, hey, if they are doing something else, like Brandon said, then is it their highest and best use, right? We'll see someone who's titled a marketing manager, gets paid like a marketing manager in the salary surveys, and then you come to find out they're making posts to Facebook, and that's really not what a marketing manager is. So make sure that you look at those things as well.
Yep, definitely. So, as we've given you guys a lot of context around that management LER. Let's talk a little bit more specifically about some things that would go in that bucket. One of the biggest questions we get is, where do I put my sales team? Well, it depends. In some cases, we put, if your organization is a sales organization, your organization sells windows, there's a good chance that we're going to put that sales labor in direct labor. And another thing that we look at many times is the compensation structure. If it's 100% eat what you kill or very minimum base, every time that you sell something, you're going to have a compensation event. Many times we put that in direct labor with them versus, hey, I've got a salaried salesperson. That might be a topic for another day. We're fans of that, believe it or not. A person, I can't say it, a person with a salary that goes in that's a salesperson. We're going to probably put them in management labor because once again, the goal there is to leverage them. Management labor should be much more leverageable than direct labor. Direct labor is going to hit a certain level of efficiency, and then every time that I bring in more margin, I've got to add something. I got to add another person to produce, another person to take care of the service offering, whatever it may be. Management labor, like Mike said, you hire a COO, you're good for a few $1,000,000. So they're very elastic in that regard and kind of growing that team. Another thing that Mike mentioned a moment ago, it's really important whenever it comes to the admin management team, is you have to have accountability. It's really easy on direct labor in many cases to look at what somebody's producing. Hey, you're cranking out X number of widgets per day, or you're seeing you're billing X number of hours, or you're working on X number of files. Well, that's a little bit more fuzzy when you get down to that admin management labor bucket. And so you got to have clear ideas of what it is that they are responsible for, and are they meeting that standard? And that standard has to also then produce, whether through the direct management of direct labor or the increasing of contribution margin. It's not just kind of hang around and take care of things. We got to have production out of everybody. So for that reason, many times we look at it more in a group setting when it comes to management LER as an individual LER that we may look at for direct as far as that part goes. So.
That's right. Well, awesome. Well, good stuff. We appreciate you all's time. We will be back next month, and look forward to delivering you some more awesome content. For Brandon, I'm Mike. You all have a good one.
Take care, guys.
See ya.
If you want to know more about driving sustainable profitability for your business, or are interested in learning more about CRI Simple Numbers, please visit our website at simplenumberscri.com. Thanks for listening to this episode of Profitability Playbook, the Simple Numbers Podcast. You can subscribe to Profitability Playbook on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you prefer to listen to podcasts. If you liked what you heard today, please leave us a review. The views expressed on Profitability Playbook, the Simple Numbers Podcast, are those of the presenter and moderator and do not necessarily reflect the views of CRI Simple Numbers or the CRI family of companies. This podcast is intended for informational and educational purposes only and is not intended to replace professional advice received directly. Consult with your CRI Simple Numbers advisor or another trusted professional if you have questions about your specific situation.